We have Jessica Salyers, the Chief Talent Management Officer with the Air Force Life Cycle Management Center. Dr. Salyers is headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio with a workforce of 26,000, executing 300 billion across 27 locations. She's responsible for the creation of the Integrated Talent Management Program, covering talent strategy, sourcing and recruiting, performance management, learning and development, succession planning, leadership development, incentives, and organizational process feedback. So she does everything over there. And without further ado, Dr. Salyers is going to be talking about the future of work, trends and implications in STEM. So Jessica, I'm going to hand the mic over to you. Your screen share looks great and you look wonderful.
All right, thank you so much. So first, thank you for having me today. It's been really interesting listening to the other presenters, and I've been feverishly kind of writing notes from what I've been hearing from others, and I think it's been a great dialogue, and hopefully I can help add to that a little bit today as we talk about the future of work. So thank you also for that great introduction. I'm trying to go forward here. Here we go. All right. So I want to start back at the beginning. So I currently work for the Air Force. I've worked here for about 17 years. For those of you who have had the opportunity to work with government organizations, any large organization, but certainly I think it's perhaps more true for government organizations or the military, Department of Defense organizations, we tend to be large. We have a lot of bureaucracy, and it can feel like things are moving really slow. And so I'm going to take you back a couple of years to when we first started having a conversation internally about the world changing and a recognition that was really time for us to pivot ourselves, which we hadn't really thought about before, and how we did that and the findings that sort of led us down that path. And I'm going to touch on them a bit briefly just to try to fit them all in today, but happy to have any side conversations or to share more information with folks if you're interested offline at all. So the first chart you see here, setting the stage, the sky is falling. So when did we first realize that the sky was sort of starting to fall on us? At the time, a few years ago, I worked for an organization called the Air Force Research Laboratory. So we were very much a STEM organization. We had about 11,000 employees, a $5 billion budget, and about 70% of our workforce worked in STEM. So they were primarily engineers. There were some scientists in there as well, and they were highly educated. That will become important later. So about half or more had a master's degree, and a third had a PhD, a medical degree, or an advanced professional degree. So we had a big organization. We were not at all flat, very hierarchical. We were spread out across the United States, internationally as well. And we were doing a lot of the traditional government business and following sort of those same processes that we'd been following for the 100 years that we had existed doing our research mission. And so I don't know if any of you, I'm sure you do, subscribe to Harvard Business Review or maybe Chief Learning Officer magazine. I saw that AMA is here, perhaps it's AMA. Many of those organizations have emails or newsletters that they send out. And so our first sort of inkling where we started to have a little bit of buzz inside our organization was I subscribed to Harvard Business Review. I got emails from them every day, and every day was sort of something new. It was, the gig economy is coming. Millennials are coming. I used to joke a lot about that. Millennials are coming. They're going to, they're coming into your organization. How are you going to be ready for them? Can you compete to hire them, to keep them? How do you upskill the boomers in your workforce? And so that, along with some of the books that you see here on this slide about Gen Y, about Gen Z, about the gig economy, you see Work Rules there by a former Google exec. All of those were laying out these ideas for the future and about how what got us here wasn't going to get us where we needed to go or be tomorrow. And again, as a government organization, we'd sort of had the luxury of taking for granted that we would always be around. We would always exist in exactly or a very similar way to the way that we had existed. And people would always want to come work for us because we were the government and we offered stability. And so with those sort of, I think, assumptions in mind, we weren't doing a lot of introspection. We wanted to hire and recruit the best, but we weren't thinking super hard about the way we should be doing that or how we should be engaging our workforce. And so when we started kind of seeing a lot of this stuff out there, and it kind of didn't stop, the flood of information just sort of kept coming. And we started to have these conversations about, well, does that apply to us? How does it apply to us? That was sort of our first inkling. And then next, I mean, and this isn't second at all, but we always knew that our people and our technology were the backbone of our organization. And I know you hear every single leader say that, but we really had that recognition, but we also recognized that our organization at that time very much catered to boomers. Our average age was between 47 and 51. Most people in leadership positions were in that age range. They'd created the processes. They were somewhat protective of the processes, and there was a certain way that we approach these processes. There's a certain way that we approach learning and development, and it was really catered to those people who had been around for a very long time and fell into that age demographic. And so once we started hearing more about these millennials and the Gen Zs, and it started to sink in a little bit, that was kind of point number two, that the world was changing and we really didn't want to be left behind. And so from all of that, that was kind of swirling around and around and around, really our takeaway was there's a new reality. And I mentioned earlier that I used to tease them about millennials. By most definitions, I fall into a millennial category usually. The millennials aren't coming. We're here. We're halfway to retirement. And if you're just now planning for millennials in the workforce, you're behind. And so we started to have some of those, I think, uncomfortable, difficult conversations about needing to pivot and needing to change the way we did business. So when I say the sky is falling, that's all those pieces that kind of came to fruition at once for us. And this was also around the time that the Air Force really started to embrace innovation in a way we never had before. And so because we had some of the support from senior leaders, it was just really, I think, a time that was just opened our eyes, and we were more willing to have these conversations that we hadn't been willing to have before. So what did we decide to do about it? Well, we're a research organization, so we said we need to do a study. I won't get into too many of the details here because I really want to focus on the future shocks for this presentation, but I do want to point out, we did an internal literature review, of course, lots of big brains working on that, but we also partnered with an external organization, Toffler Associates, and most of their focus in consulting is on future of work. Together with them, we did 100 interviews with like Fortune 50 companies whose names we can't share, but they're household names. And we also conducted 10 additional interviews with other government organizations all around this idea of future. And for this, we really talked about the future as notionally being the year 2030. And we asked them, and you see this here at the bottom of the screen here, how are you preparing for the future? We knew that we needed to change and be agile, but as a government organization, we didn't know how to do that. And so we were hoping to learn from others. Our big takeaway is most of the companies, internal to government and external, basically said, we're not. We know we should be, but we are mired down in the day-to-day. How do I get funding for training? How do I make sure everybody's taken the training? How do I just get people in the door? And so they said, we'd love to hear more. Tell us what you're doing and come back to us. So we left there with a couple of takeaways that you'll hear about later, but largely nobody else had the answer that we were hoping to hear. And so we weren't able to kind of pick any pieces up and just bring it to our organization the way we had initially hoped. And one of the questions you see down there at the bottom is, how does this fit in or contradict or challenge our existing policies? And for us, that was really a question that was important for us to answer. We are governed by many, many, many agencies. And so we can't just implement good ideas. There are lots of levels of permission. And so it became really important for us to be able to point to and say, these people are doing this, it's working, here's the data that proves that, in order for us to go forward. So when we talk about the workforce trends, what does the future of work look like? These are the 6 trends, and we'll walk through each of them on a separate chart for each one. But these are sort of the future. And again, this was very much focused on STEM workforce. And so as we started thinking about how to prepare, these were the 6 areas that became really clear and abundant for us. And you see down there in what I call a bang box at the bottom, one of our guiding principles was there is a global war on talent. And what we meant by that was we're competing with people inside the government, outside the government, inside the United States, outside the United States, to hire the best talent, to retain it, to keep people engaged, to figure out how to upskill them. We're not playing in a small sandbox. And so if we are going to be competitive, we have to be willing to try new things. And that was a really scary concept for our organization, the way that we were stood up. But this really sort of shocked us into reality. So we'll just walk through each one of these. So the first one is brain drain. And this probably isn't exactly what you think. This is not about attrition. This is not about losing knowledge in our organization due to retirement or losing knowledge in our organization due to people getting new jobs. That is a concern, but this one, being STEM focused, was about people either coming to the United States to get STEM degrees and leaving, or people, our talent pipeline in STEM not being deep enough or long enough. So we just didn't have enough people to choose from. And this one was also a little bit about the STEM programs that we have being considered subpar compared to the rest of the world. So in one of the pieces of research, a stat that came out to us was 46% of people globally said that the STEM education and the STEM pipeline was subpar to the rest of the world. And so we started to need to have the question, why is that? How do we get people interested in this? How do we make sure that they're getting all of the skills that they need to be successful? And so that brain drain doesn't just mean that they're leaving my company or my organization. It means I can't even keep them in my talent pool at all. In our minds, you don't have to be an employee for the Air Force. You can be an employee for anybody in the United States because we have contracts all over. And so the question really started to become, if we want to remain, successful at our mission and be able to beat our adversaries and all of that, how do we make sure that we have this top talent and keep it here? And this one really does have a strong component for learning and development, not only from a STEM degree perspective, but later we'll talk about these micro accreditations, but from that certificate accreditation perspective as well. What can we offer that gives us the skills that we need? And then how do we harness that and keep that here where we need it? If we go to the next one, a cleared paradox. I won't spend too much time on this one because I don't think there's a large application outside of the government, but this one is really about this idea of intellectual property versus collaboration. And I do think I heard this kind of in passing in some of the other talks today, but one of the challenges that we have is everything has to be cleared. Everything has a clearance level associated with it. And we start talking about STEM and sharing information, things can quickly turn to conversations that we're not allowed to have publicly. And for our STEM researchers, where it's really important for them to go to conferences, to collaborate on publishing, et cetera, it becomes really important to be able to collaborate with others, whether that's others from industry, whether that's others from academia. We can't continue to just, slide by on what we've learned 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or when we finished our degrees. We have to keep learning. And in order to keep doing that, we've got to figure out how to collaborate better. So this was really all about the idea that partnering and learning from others is greater than protecting the information that we have. And certainly from a defense perspective, that becomes really, really challenging for our organization. So this finding in particular got a lot of pushback whenever it first came out. People were just very uncomfortable with the idea of sharing more. Again, the idea was collectively, if we work together and pool our knowledge, we'll be better off than if we all each individually protect the information that we have. Transdisciplinarity, if you tried to look this up, you'll find it's not a word, but this is something that we came up with to really describe this idea that in STEM in particular, it's not enough to just be an expert in your area. It's not enough to just have a big brain or be really smart or have lots of advanced degrees. This is really important. And I heard another presentation talk about soft skills earlier, and we're trying to rebrand them and call them essential skills because a lot of our workforce doesn't like the term soft skills, but really this is about if I hire you and you're really smart, but you're a jerk, you're probably going to have a negative impact on our employee engagement. You're going to have a negative impact on our culture. And so I need to make sure that when you come in, that you have these other skills that I think are going to be really important for you to do lots of different types of jobs and work, whether that's leading people, whether that's communicating, whether that's inspiring others, whether it's the ability to collaborate. And so many universities now are starting to are starting to put these soft skills into some of their STEM undergraduate programs. But the question for us really was, as an organization and a culture, how do we breed that? How do we begin to value these other non-technical pieces in a technical environment? And that becomes a little bit difficult, but it's something that we've been working on now for the past 3 or so years. And it's really this idea that how you think is greater than what you know today. So your ability to embrace this continuous learning model, this learning organizational culture, we're going to value that more than the person who comes in with all of this deep subject matter expertise, because one person is going to be able to adapt with us in our organization and the other one is not. I can tell you this is not traditionally how our organization as a laboratory operated. We had lots of people with big egos and big personalities who didn't get along well with others, and we were okay with that because they had the knowledge we needed. And so this really represents a really, really big culture shift for our organization. Gig science, I know I have heard about this one a little bit today. This is really about organizing around people on the work versus position. So in the past, we had a vacancy and I filled it with somebody who looked just like the person who left on paper, right? They had the same degrees or credentials, or, they had so many years of experience. And this is really about getting away from that. This is really about demonstrable talent. So what can you demonstrate to me that you know? And now in the era where we're seeing a lot more digital training, digital skills, especially in the software arena, where if you can solve this really hard software problem for me, you've demonstrated this skill set and I can bring you on much faster versus making you go get a lot of additional training that a lot of our employees felt was box checking. This is a totally new way of doing business for us. The other piece here that I think is worth mentioning is other than kind of a draft the best athlete approach, this is also about, if I come in, if I come in as a finance person, I'm more than a finance person to you. It's not just, Jessica, welcome to our organization. You're going to be crunching numbers for the next, 10 years or however long we hope you're here. But it's really, Jessica, tell me, what other skills do you have? Maybe I want you to lead a project, or maybe I want you to lead a program. I didn't know that you had skills and I could use you in this technical area. As an example, one of our CFOs, our chief financial officer, had an undergraduate degree in chemistry. She started out in science and she moved over, and we have to allow for that. Some of the other statistics that I think are important here in our research that we found was 80% of the global economy in 2030 will be gig. So if we can't figure out how we play in that space, we are going to be left behind. We've got to figure out how to reach those employees, keep them engaged, make them feel valued. Before we lose them for all this flexibility that the gig economy kind of offers. And we can't assume that they're going to want to come to us because we're stable, especially knowing that we're somewhat limited in some of the other things we can offer, such as pay, et cetera. So this one's really, really important to us and represents, again, just another huge change. Accredited credibility. So this one is all about micro-credentials. One of the things that we found was when people came into our organization as a STEM organization, they had an advanced degree and they were kind of like, thank you, I'm done, right? I got my doctorate. I'm good. I'll be here. I'll lead research. I've arrived. I know what I'm talking about. As many of you probably know, I think the first 5 or so years after, if you get an advanced degree, you're considered kind of a really deep expert in that field. But the rate of change is so fast that you quickly become no longer the expert. Yes, you're highly educated. Yes, you know a lot. You offer a lot. There's a lot of value there. But this idea that you're done, that doesn't ring true. We have to have continuous learning. We have to have this interest in continuous improvement, et cetera, or else we're not going to be able to survive. Some of the other things that I wanted to mention here, 85% of the jobs, I think I said this before, in 2030, they don't exist now. So we don't even know what we're preparing for fully in the future. And so there's no way that I can give you one degree, one certification, one training class, or a group of training classes that's going to fully prepare you. What instead we have to do is instill this idea of being adaptable, of being open to learning, of valuing learning and valuing that continuous improvement so that we can be agile and we can be ready for anything, no matter what it looks like. If we guess wrong and the future doesn't look like what we think, that we've got a company of employees who are ready to meet that challenge, whatever that challenge might look like. The last one here, rules of engagement. This one is really all about, our senior leader said it was about catering to the employees, but this one is really about hiring and employee engagement. Employees expect something different than they did 30 years ago. Many of them might not expect to come and work for the same company for 30 years. Many might expect that you're going to help them pay for a degree, pay for training, invest in them, invest in their development differently than what people expected in the past. They're going to expect you to have that interest in them in order for them to remain engaged. And so this is really, again, a very different way than we've approached things in the past. It's kind of been, hi, welcome, you're in the government, you're going to be here forever, we hope. And this is what it's like here. And there wasn't really that relationship or that dialogue to understand what are you looking for and what can we provide you. Again, this was before COVID, but we were really just starting to dip our toe in the water about remote work. A lot of people were very uncomfortable with it. COVID has absolutely accelerated that, I think in a mostly good way, but that was one of the things employees were interested in. As a government organization, we can't pay as much as industry can. What else can I offer you? And so that might be investing in your development, investing in your training. That might be giving you the opportunity to work on a really cool project, lead something, have autonomy. We have to really start looking at some of those soft, amorphous things that we've been very uncomfortable about in the past in order to keep this workforce that we're going to work so hard to bring into our organization. So all of this resulted in a pilot, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about it today, but what we basically did was, with all this information, with all of these findings that we had, we said, all right, now it's time to hold up the mirror and say, we understand what we think the future looks like, at least as it relates to STEM. Let's compare that to what we look like. Of no surprise to anyone, it looked very different than our organization. We are not flat. We didn't have a lot of extra incentives. We were very much rooted in stability, what some employees felt was box checking in terms of educational requirements. And so after we looked at that, we realized we really did need to make a change, not only to recruit and hire, but in order to keep the employees that we had in our organization as well. So before we did a pilot, we went out and we talked to our employees and we said, what do you guys think? How's it going? We heard what probably many people hear about whenever you ask about any people or HR processes. And that was basically, it's slow, it's hard. I don't know how to hire. I don't know how to train. I don't know how to fire. There's not enough emphasis on it. It's opaque. I just kind of don't know where to go or what to do. And so from that, we created a pilot of 5 processes. What you see on the top here is really just what the original processes were. And on the bottom are some of the changes that we made. So this was, again, across 5 areas: recruiting, selection, interviewing, hiring, and performance management. This is where some of what we found in the interviews really came into play. Those interviews with industry, some of those tidbits of best practices that we were able to get. And what you see down, I don't know if it's showing up very well, but in purple, those are really some of the big changes. So under recruiting, for the first time in the history of the Air Force, we were given permission to use executive headhunters. We'd never been allowed to do that in the past. What that allowed us to do was go out to companies who did this for a living, and they were able to go out and touch passive talent and people who otherwise would not be interested in some of our positions and sell our company to them, tell them why it was great to work here, why it was worth coming and perhaps taking a pay cut to come work for us in our mission. That was so huge for us, because it was just another example of us trying to kind of get with the times and some things that companies had been doing for years that we hadn't been able to do. You see under interviewing, multiple encounters, we started doing what we called a 360-degree interview. And this was really, instead of like a one-off 30-minute interview, this was an interview with your peers, interview with people who would be your subordinates, and interview with who your boss would be as well. You see other things there that we highlighted, but it was really eliminating a lot of the processes that we made difficult, and it was eliminating lots of steps and getting waivers where appropriate. And the reason I'm kind of glossing over this a little bit is there were 2 phases of the pilot, and this was the first phase. And you might notice that this doesn't match up to some of those shocks we found. What we found was we couldn't go in and introduce some of these things about the shocks, about the micro credentials, about the gig work. We couldn't make those changes to our culture without first fixing our basic issues. And these were some of our basic HR issues. And so we spent about a year doing this pilot. We collected a lot of data, presented it to senior leaders, got a lot of feedback from the people in our organization. And today, all of these processes, and again, I can talk to you more offline in detail if you're interested in any of them, but all of these processes have now been adopted. That has really cleared the way for us to do a phase 2. And a phase 2 was really focusing on incentives, things to keep our employees engaged. It was really trying to get away from a degree-based hiring and get more into that skill set. And so the language on this chart is very governmenty, because this is what we had to submit up to get approval. But basically, we were asking for new authorities to do things. And the new authorities were to do things like a student loan repayment, which in the past had been very, very, very capped and was not at all comparable to what industry was doing. And so all the things that you see here, by the way, on this phase 2, these have all been approved as well. And we're working through how to execute them now. So the student loan repayments, that was one. You see on here the ability to provide increased pay if you're a supervisor, or perhaps if you finished a degree. In the past, we weren't allowed to change your pay. We could change your pay once a year during your appraisal. In the middle of the year, for any reason, we couldn't do it. So this allows us to do that. Remote work. This allows us to let people work remotely. Again, this was before COVID and before everybody was working remotely, but this allowed us to do that. You could work from anywhere instead of having to, relocate to one of our locations. This allows us to do meaningful awards. And so we were hearing in industry that to keep employees engaged, they did kind of competitions that would result in high dollar value awards to the employees. We weren't allowed to. This allowed us to do that. And so there are a lot of things in here that based on this research, we were moving towards. And we're hopeful that some of the other things on micro accreditation, et cetera, are going to be in our future as well. And we're currently working those today. So with that, this is my last chart. And the last point I want to make is, as we continue to talk about the future and prepare for the future is now. It's already happening. So we need to be careful not to overthink and over research, which is why I like this pilot idea. We need to start thinking about how we can incorporate these things into our workforce and our organizations today and not wait. And so with that, I'll just pause if anybody has any questions for me.
All right. Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much. I'm popping back in. I do have a couple of questions here for you. And the first one is, how long did the workforce agility study take?
So the workforce agility study part was about 1 year, and then the pilot went on for about another year. So it took us about a year to conduct all of those, to do the lit review and then conduct all of the interviews and whatnot. And part of that, honestly, was just trying to get in to talk to some of those companies who didn't know who we were whenever we reached out to discuss them. So it was really a 2-year effort before we got to a decision point and started really incorporating these into our organization.
And then how long did oh, good. I thought I was on mute. Sorry about that. How long did the workforce pilot take to execute?
Yeah, so we did that for about a year with those 5 processes, collecting feedback on them. So we had lots of measures in place to say, is this faster? Is it better? Does it have an impact? And then talking with supervisors and other people in the organization as well, just to see, do they like these changes that we've made, and get to give them a vote in the process. Do they want to make these permanent or not? So that was about a year.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then, so since the pilot, how has the government adapted its processes to embrace the pilot findings and or the future workforce shocks?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we, at the completion of the pilot, now the Air Force Research Lab, they're doing all of these processes. We started out doing it only in half of them. Now they're all doing it at all of their locations worldwide. In the other shocks, for example, the micro accreditations and some of the other things, we are working on those now. The Air Force itself is undergoing what they're calling a digital transformation. And that piece of those micro credentials and micro certifications in lieu of degrees, as well as hiring people with those instead of degrees, we are working on that today.
Okay, and then I think we have time for one more question. How do these findings relate to STEM, and how do they, two-parter, how do these findings relate to STEM, and how do they relate to industry organizations?
Yeah, so they relate to STEM in that most of the research that we did was focused on STEM career fields. So not to say that some of it wouldn't also relate to like an HR or to a finance, but especially for the things like the accredited credibility, some of the micro credentials, the need to have those advanced degrees. What we found was that often didn't relate one-to-one to some of the functional organizations where, for example, maybe degrees weren't required. So they weren't facing that same problem at the same degree that we were. future. I think in terms of application to industry, anybody who's working in a STEM organization who has those some of those same cultural things maybe that we had in terms of the people who are highly technical, but who lack some of those soft skills, which we saw a presentation on earlier. I think that applies to them. And certainly just all of these shocks for the future, I think there's a piece of application that applies whether you're in STEM or not. Just our respondents all happen to be in STEM.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing with us today. We're at time, so I would like to remind everyone, again, if you have questions, you can send them directly to Jessica by going to the lounge in the VR platform and sending a message there. And then also, Jessica will get any more outstanding questions over to you and get them over your way. So thank you so much for taking the time and for joining us today. I'm going to get ready for our next session.